Good morning, and welcome to Georgia Power's Social Justice Webinar Series. My name is Charmaine Ward Milner, and I'm Director of Corporate Relations and the Chair of the Social Justice Steering Committee. We are so excited that you have joined us for the third in our series of 6 social justice webinars. But before we get started, I like to do a safety briefing. Every meeting we have always starts with thinking of safety first. So if you are at home where you know where the exits are, I do want to make sure that you look in front and behind, on the sides, and especially look at the bottom of where your feet are. Make sure that there aren't any objects on the floor or any drawers open or anything that might obstruct you from moving if you need to leave. If you're not at home, then please look to the front and back and both sides to make sure that you're aware of where the exits are. And now, with safety in mind, we will continue with the webinar. What I'd like to do is share with you first a little overview about the social justice commitment, and it all starts with moving to equity, or MTE. This is on the screen that you see right now, and this was a commitment that was made by Tom Fanning back in January of last year after a series of unfortunate social injustice incidents. And a number of leaders across our system got together and said, how can we address this, right? What can we do? And so one of the things that we did was we came up with this framework in terms of our commitment to how we will make sure that the business policies we have, the practices that we have, and how we make decisions, that we think about all of the critical areas with equity in mind. And so moving to equity, or you may hear it referred to as MTE, are these 5 commitment areas, which are critical areas for our system: talent, culture, community, political engagement, and suppliers. What we want to focus on today is the commitment area of community. This is where Southern Company made a commitment of initially $200 million, but now $225 million over 5 years to advance racial equity and social justice. And this is where we talk about the social justice commitment. So out of this community commitment here under MTE is where we move to talk about social justice commitment. And so now, what is that social justice commitment? What we did was we committed to 4 areas, and initially it was 3 areas. I really like it that we are flexible, and where we see that we need to expand, we've been able to pivot very quickly. And so the first 3 pillars were education equity, criminal justice equity, and economic empowerment. And now we've added energy justice. So these are the 4 pillars that we talk about when we're talking about our commitment to social justice and investing $225 million over 5 years from a Southern Company perspective. We've also committed to 5,000 employee mentors, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and how it relates to Georgia Power. But I want to spend just a few minutes talking about these pillars. Underneath each of the pillars, you see that there are tenets, and then beneath those there are focus areas. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to look at the entire scope. So when you look at education equity, it starts with early childhood, moves through K-12, and through higher education, specifically around HBCUs, as well as minority institutions that have a high population of minority students. And then when you go to criminal justice equity, it starts with prevention. And then, because we want to stop our young people from even getting in trouble and going to jail. But if they do get stopped, how can we make sure that they go to pre-arrest programs as opposed to going to jail? And then if they do happen to, do something that, that means that they're going to have to go to jail, when they come out, how can we ensure that they are trained and that they have all the tools and resources that they need so that they can re-enter society and be productive citizens? And then finally, what training can we give to our first responders so that they know how to deal with various situations and are able to de-escalate? When we look at economic empowerment, this is really a big pillar. It contains both entrepreneurship as well as really community investment and community revitalization. When we're looking at entrepreneurs, we're looking at really how do we help entrepreneurs grow and have capacity building? How do we give them access to capital? What about workforce development and job training? Also financial literacies for being able to take care of their business and their personal business, as well as their business that they're working on, and being able to make good financial decisions. And then we move on to community investment. We're looking at how can we invest in infrastructure, things like affordable housing, and really seeing how we can have thriving communities, right? And what investments need to be made in those communities. And finally, energy justice. Under energy equity, we're looking at trying to help making sure that all of our communities have access, and that energy burden, which is when an individual's energy cost, what they pay for energy, is a high percentage of their income. That's energy burden. Or energy assistance, how can we make sure that communities have access to programs that will allow them to help pay their bills, or that they have access to energy efficiency and weatherization types of programs and tools. And then we look at just transition. This is really about e-transportation, e-cars, having access to electric chargers, or even our school system having electric buses. We also look at renewables and how do all communities have access to different renewables, whether it's solar or wind or air, and then job training around sustainability and the whole ecosystem of energy and renewables. And then finally, around environmental justice, looking at those disadvantaged communities, or those communities that are fence line, which means they border any of our assets, whether it's our headquarters or a substation or a generation plant, or those communities that are called fence frontline, where they are in an area where they are exposed to really critical weather. So let's take an example, would be like a coastal community. So these are just a little bit of just trying to help you understand what the focus areas are under each of these pillars. And then you might say, okay, but why is all of this important? Because what we know is that when we have individuals that are educated, that means that we have a stronger workforce. That means that we have communities that are thriving. That when we ensure that we are helping people who do go to jail to be trained, we are helping them not to go to jail. Again, that really plays into a stronger workforce, as well as having thriving communities. Because when individuals are educated and when they come back as retrained and productive citizens, they then have jobs, they're buying products, and they're investing into the whole economy of that community that they're in. And of course, when we look at thriving communities, when we have thriving communities and when we have small businesses that are doing well and that are prospering, and then finally, we're making sure that all communities have access to, energy, the benefits of energy, what we know is that we have a stronger community. And we have a stronger community, we have a stronger Georgia. And when Georgia is stronger, Georgia power is stronger. So that's why these particular pillars are so important. And I want you to know that it's not by happenstance, but that a lot of research and a lot of time went into determining where is the biggest gaps and where can we make the biggest difference. And we feel that by investing in those 4 pillars, that we can change the trajectory of some of those communities. So now, what does that mean for Georgia Power? In terms of Georgia Power's commitment, that $225 million over 5 years is really $87 million over 5 years. And you can see how it's allocated across the 4 pillars. Annually, it's an $18 million investment. And for some of you who are my math majors out there, maybe saying, well, $18 million over 5 years, it doesn't add up. That's because we just added the energy justice pillar, and we won't start that investment until 2022. Also for Georgia Power, we have committed to 250 Georgia Power employees who engage as mentors. Now, we know our employees are always volunteering and they want to help in the community. So we are hoping that not only will we make that 250 mentors, but that we will exceed that number annually. So I really have shared with you moving to equity framework, how that community pillar is really the social justice commitment. I share with you the 4 pillars that make up the social justice commitment and the dollar investment that we are looking at really investing to make a difference. The one other thing I'd like to share is I've heard some questions about, so how does DE&I come into play? DE&I, if you want to think about in this simplistic form, is our internal initiatives, how we're being inclusive, how we're demonstrating that we're being inclusive, that we're thinking about diversity, that it's important, and that we're practicing that in all of the different things that we're doing. As social justice is looking at the external focus. So that's a simplistic way to look at it. So with that, I want to just show you a video that our president and CEO, Chris Womack, put together around social justice. And he does a much better job than I do of sharing it.
At Georgia Power, we believe it's our responsibility to be an active champion of the communities we serve. That's why we're excited to stand with our communities to tackle systemic equity issues across our state. We're committing $75 million to address these issues over the next 5 years, focusing on supporting and partnering with organizations that assist with education equity, criminal justice, and economic empowerment. And we're building a team of more than 250 employees who will serve as mentors to our state's young people, helping shape Georgia's future leaders. This financial investment and our commitment to mentoring, while just a part of our overall equity efforts, are one way we can make a real impact in distressed and disadvantaged communities and continue to be a champion for all Georgians.
Thank you, Chris. I think that was awesome how he shared his insight and perspective on our social justice commitment. If you have more questions or if you'd like to get additional resources, please visit our social justice portal, which you can find on the DE&I webpage. With that, I'd like to get our webinar started. Today, we're talking about community investment, and we have an amazing moderator, Christy Rochelle, who is the Director of Community and Economic Development, and with her, she has a panel of subject matter experts. So Christy, it's all yours.
Thanks, Charmaine. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you virtually to talk about community investment. So the purpose of the webinar is to educate employees on the landscape, the challenges, and the importance of community investment. Not only do we want to educate, we also want to issue a call to action so that employees will take part and make an impact in the community investment space in the communities we serve. So I'd like to start with an overview of community investment. What is community investment? So community investment is the holistic practice of channeling public and private investment to support low-income and underserved communities in order to provide credit, training, capital, quality jobs, housing, and access to goods and services these communities would otherwise lack. Why is community investment challenging? These markets have a tough time attracting traditional debt and equity capital, and projects are often hard to finance. It's also a challenge because of the shortage of affordable housing units to satisfy current and future demand. And there's not adequate commercial and community goods and services available to residents of these communities. How does community investment connect to our business? Well, it's long been a priority for the company to promote the state, all it has to offer, and part of our work for us to help communities prepare for growth. We serve as a convener, getting leaders together in the same room we wouldn't gather otherwise. And we're in a unique position to convene disparate views in order to reach consensus on the allocation of scarce community investment resources. So moving to equity means helping all members of our communities, creating and improving access and opportunity. Investment in community revitalization, infrastructure, and housing results in stronger, more resilient communities, and all of that means a stronger economy and a stronger Georgia. A stronger Georgia attracts more business, more customers, more jobs, and more capital investment. So today we have with us a panel of experts in every sense of the word, and I'll share that every single panelist is a longtime partner to the company on a number of different efforts. And I'm delighted to have all four of you with us today. So what we'll do is we'll go around the squares, and I'd ask each of you to introduce yourself. You'll state your name, your organization, and your role, along with how your role relates to community investment. And let's start with Catherine.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. My name is Catherine Moore. I'm president of Georgia Conservancy. Look forward to telling you more about our organization shortly, but in a nutshell, we work statewide. I have the wonderful challenge of working with communities across the varied landscape of Georgia, and our focus on community investment is helping communities find that balance between economic opportunity and environmental conservation, and we absolutely believe those things go hand in hand, and as has been mentioned today, are very much part of our future of a stronger Georgia.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Megan.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me today on the Community Investment webinar. I'm Megan Shannon Volkovic. I'm the market leader for Enterprise Community Partners here in the Southeast office. And Enterprise is a national nonprofit housing intermediary, and under our current strategic plan, we're focused on increasing affordable housing supply, advancing racial equity, focusing on multifamily resilience across the Southeast. Earlier, coastal communities were talked about, so that's very important to us, and also upward mobility for our low-income families. And I'll look forward to telling you more in a bit.
Great. Thanks, Megan. Sarah.
Good morning. It is wonderful to be with you all. I'm Sarah Kirsch. I serve as Executive Director of ULI Atlanta. We are a district council of the Urban Land Institute. ULI is headquartered in Washington, D.C., but is a global nonprofit that is a member-driven and mission-driven organization. Our members are broadly everyone who touches how cities get built. And our mission is to shape the future of cities for transformative impact worldwide. You'll hear more about how we harness our members' talents and help drive their expertise for better outcomes for community investment.
Indeed you do. Thanks, Sarah. And Mike.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Alexander, and I'm the director of the Center for Livable Communities at the Atlanta Regional Commission. We are the regional planning agency for metropolitan Atlanta, and we have a broad policy mandate to work on the long-range future for metropolitan Atlanta. We spend a lot of time thinking about future infrastructure needs, and that's critically a part of the investment that our communities are making to help address the issues that matter to people, their daily commute, environmental impacts, and of course, community development, things like housing affordability and what our land use patterns look like as well. So more about that in a little bit. And finally, we love data, and you're going to feel that in just a few minutes.
You do, and we love that you love data, Mike. So it's great to have all of you with us. So now we will hear from each of our panelists. Each will have 5 to 7 minutes to talk to you and share some information. And after that, I have questions for the panel, and then we will take questions from the audience. So we will start with Mike Alexander.
Thank you. And I think, Warren, when you click to the next slide, don't click any further. Leave it right there, because I want everybody on this webinar to think in their own mind what the answer to this question is. And I'm going to read it specifically. If a typical white family in the United States has 100 units of overall wealth, how many units of overall wealth does the typical Black family have? So think about that for a second. And I'll let you know, this is a question that we've asked for 2 years now through our Metro Atlanta Speaks survey. We've been doing that survey of over 4,000 people in metropolitan Atlanta since 2013. We added this question based on some of the research and understanding that we had developed about people's perceptions of how the economic ecosystem was actually working. So let's do one click and So what you're seeing on the horizontal axis is people's mean response. So across these demographic characteristics, I'm going to ask Warren to click very quickly now. So all respondents in the region thought that the answer was 51 units of wealth for a Black household, but you can see lower income households thought that number was lower. You get better educated, it's back in the 50s. Black respondents to the survey had the lowest response. They thought that wealth was 36. And of course, white people thought that that was 62. And so click one more time. The actual answer is 10. And so clearly, the average residents in Metro Atlanta don't understand this most fundamental disparity in the economic wealth building of Black and white households. And so the data geek in me, if you'll click one more time, will acknowledge, should one other pop-up will come up, that this is a question most people probably don't have enough information to answer. The honest answer would be to say you don't know. But if you have a college degree or a graduate or professional degree, your confidence is very high that you know what the answer is. So very few people answer, I don't know. The highest don't knows were actually people, the lowest, I'm sorry, I'm saying that wrong, I apologize. If you look at the 49 number, you can see it's not lining up anymore. That's why I'm struggling. It moved a little bit on me. So if you look at that, you would see when it's properly aligned that the people with the least amount of education actually have the lowest response rates to this. So the more you think you know, the more wrong you are in answering this survey. But it's a good starting point to the next slide. And this is something that we found a few years ago on a basic web search. And I don't think anything gets at this ecosystem, the systems level impact on people of color, Black people in particular, and how if you look at it from left to right and go down and around, you'll see the fact that you're much less likely to have a wealth transfer, less likely to go to college, more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system. So your income's going to be less access to credit, worse health outcomes, less home ownership, which is critical, and at the end, less retirement savings. So we have to think about these impacts of the system holistically, and that's my critical message today. And getting people to understand that the system is not producing equitable outcomes is critical, and understanding all the things that impact that wealth difference that I just showed you is something we're critically focused on at the Atlanta Regional Commission. Next slide. And so again, data, and you can see low-income households, if you're looking at the chart on the right, are more dependent for their wealth being in their home than higher income households. That's commonsensical. And then on the left, we've looked at data on share of home ownership by income groupings. This is brand new data that our staff has put together. And you can see the actual number of people in those lower income brackets owning a home has actually gone down. So they're more depending on wealth through their home, but fewer low-income households own a home in net terms in Metro Atlanta. I put the links in there always for you. Next slide. And again, this fundamental disparity and this one way that you can accumulate wealth in Metro Atlanta, the average white household, 75% of those that are living in a home own their home, and that number for Black or African American is 47%. And I think we'd all agree, after everything I've showed you, that that disparity is cumulative. And what is going on, that this is the current circumstance after all we've learned about housing markets. Next slide. And so if you're looking at it spatially across the region, you can see there are big differences at the county level in this change in homeownership rate over the last roughly 20 years. See, Fulton County, it actually, this is for all people, ticked up slightly, but in Henry County in particular, it's fallen dramatically. And I know some of us in particular are thinking a lot about what it means to have more and more homes, single family detached homes going into rental, and how that impacts people's ability to buy a single family home. So next slide, please. So what are we doing about it? And I want to make sure you understand that at the Atlanta Regional Commission, especially under my boss, Executive Director Doug Hooker's leadership, we focused on collaborations. And so these are just some of the logos of the different ways we're trying to work well with others, to think beyond our classic work at the ARC. And so you'll see that one of my favorite examples is the Aerotropolis Alliance, which we helped start, which is really an initiative to help bring economic growth to one of the most underserved areas, actually, but one of the most powerful, our airport, working on health through Archie, the Water District, and of course, Learn for Life, one of our programs that we partner with our core partners to try to bring best practices to the education system. Can't boil the ocean, but where we can to bring evidence-based impact to children and their education here in Metro Atlanta in a way that helps all of our children. Because I want to emphasize this as well. Our focus is to make sure that this is a region that works for everyone. And you have to do that holistically, what you're seeing on this slide, and you have to do it collaboratively. And that's, in summary, where we are at the ARC right now with this work. And I'll turn it back over to you. Keep going. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. The data is astonishing. It truly is. And it does paint a very clear picture of the gaps. And collaboration is key. And Georgia Power is proud to be a partner and have a great partnership with the ARC. And so thank you for sharing that. Your slides are always helpful. All right, we will turn it over to Catherine Moore.
Well, good morning, or we're right at good afternoon. It's that in-between time. Mike has set me up beautifully, I think, to share some additional thoughts. So we'll begin with my first slide. Is not too dissimilar from the expressions of collaboration and a stronger Georgia that have already been shared this morning. But Georgia Conservancy's vision, I will make you aware of, is a Georgia where all people and the environment thrive. So we do not believe that our community development is a choice of one or the other. I'd like to build that thought with you, just a few considerations here on the next few minutes with some of my own data. So one of the things that we want you to be aware of is you look at the entire state of Georgia and you look, next slide please, at the picture of where growth is projected to come in the coming years, and as well where contraction or loss of population is expected to come. And it's this thought of contributing to all communities with the appropriate type and the appropriate manner of community investment to drive community development, which we believe can drive improved quality of life for households and individuals. And we believe, again, that includes consideration of the environment and the economics of our state. So as we know, our state is projected to grow, and different numbers maybe will show you slightly different exact numbers, but generally we know that millions are coming to Georgia, and we know that growth and the growth pressure will look differently across our state. You see in the visual before you red and oranges where the percentage of growth is anticipated to be more intense, and you'll see lighter blues and darker blues where we're going to see counties and cities lose population. We think there are opportunities in both of these ends of the growth pressure spectrum, and we believe firmly and fully that our communities can best drive their future resilience when they are thinking about today's very topic, which is community investment and community development. Next slide. So historically, what has happened in our state are these snapshots before you, these little thumbnails. The red on the map of Georgia represents developed land that is no longer forest, ag, some other use, but is developed, whether it's residential, it's commercial, or it's industrial. And not surprising, we see around Atlanta and our other metros of Savannah and Macon, we see that red continue to expand. What that has meant has been several things that I wish I had more time to share with you about, but the big takeaway for today is that no jurisdictions in our state have seen a reduction in developed land cover. We've seen development continue to grow. That presents opportunities, but it also presents challenges for individual households, for people being perhaps not near job centers, perhaps not being near other assets, and then it presents environmental challenges as we've lost very important ecological services. Next slide. On top of these thoughts that I'm planting with you, and I hope to connect together here at the end, is this really interesting data point that the majority of our cities or our towns, our incorporated areas here in Georgia, are made up of populations 5,000 or less. So while we may think of Georgia, and Atlanta comes to mind, again, Savannah, Macon, Valdosta, Columbus, some of our larger cities, we are actually a state of small cities and small towns. And that means fewer resources in terms of a tax base, staff at the city level to help solve some of these challenging problems, just bandwidth perhaps to even think about them. So that collaboration that Mike spoke about is of the utmost importance to tackle these challenges of growth and loss, environmental impact, and development opportunity, with the fact that not all our local governments have all the resources they need. And that presents every opportunity for the panelists here today, you all as actors in your community, to be civic leaders and conveners and collaborators in your own way. A few more slides just to leave a few additional thoughts with you. We heard a moment ago about energy burden. Let me give you another definition, which is cost burden, the cost burden of housing, and energy burden is layered within that. What you see before you is another map of the state of Georgia. The gray indicates counties where we unfortunately don't have data, but you see in the multitude of other counties where we do have data, we see oranges and reds that are indicating a high percentage of households in our state that are cost burdened with housing. That is meaning that a multitude of households, a far majority of them in our state, are spending 30% of their income monthly and then certainly annually on just providing shelter and the things that go into shelter, such as utility cost. And this is having an overarching impact on some of the home ownership rates and just some of the financial mobility and financial flexibility that Mike touched on a little bit. Next slide. So as I leave you with this, a few thoughts about what do we do about this? We all, as collaborators, as folks that are all in our own way part of community development, community building, even as an individual, we can discuss and advocate and educate in our communities the opportunities to do a few things that are simple but so meaningful. First, think about, where does housing go? Well, we jokingly call in our office, or we say in our office, stuff near stuff. We want households near things. We want them near job centers, near assets, near shopping, near healthcare, and you don't have to be in a city. It can be a county area or a crossroads community, but having housing as close as possible to amenities, to assets, presents every opportunity for walkability, bikeability, diminished environmental impact, and diminished energy resource need, and certainly, again, environmental impact. Next slide. Another opportunity we have to begin to discuss housing and keeping things near each other is this concept that Georgia Conservancy talks quite a lot about, which is redevelopment, reuse, and infill. What you see in this simple schematic is perhaps a typical street in your community, wherever you may live across our state, and certain lots, certain streets in our communities present opportunity for infill, redevelopment, and reuse, and by virtue of that, an increase in community housing choice. Next slide. You see in that typical street view, we've got a little animation, if you'll hit there we go. You see that in this typical street view that there's an opportunity for additional housing, even within an already developed footprint. As we think about home ownership, as we think about just the growth in our state, and even the contraction, as I mentioned earlier, some communities, advancing housing choice and housing options in your community, whether growing or shrinking, will stabilize your community. It will allow you to greater accommodation of the change that is coming. It will present greater rental and certainly eventually greater home ownership opportunities. And in doing so, from an environmental perspective, from my original slide of Georgia, where people and the environment thrive, we've been more thoughtful in our impact to the environment. And I'll leave you with a final visual that diversity of housing choice is absolutely community character. As I have conversations around the state, and I'm talking with individuals, as I'm talking with local electeds, and as I'm talking with civic leaders, I hear concern about change that population growth or, again, contraction may present. And I remind folks that quite some decades ago, we were very adept at constructing, financing, and just allowing and accepting a variety of housing options in our community. And so we can look to our past to help us understand how we can accommodate a variety of housing needs as we undertake community development across the state. Thank you for the time to present a few thoughts.
Thank you, Catherine. I wrote down and circled, and if I had a highlighter, I would have used that too. Intentional and thoughtful development decisions. I mean, we all know that's key. It's a critical piece of the puzzle. Variety of housing options. Of course, we know that's becoming more and more important. Everybody doesn't want the single family house with the picket fence anymore. So we have to be ready for these options, and that does help with stability. And we are engaged with you on a number of different fronts in the housing space and have an upcoming summit, and I've had several programs in the past. So excited to continue that important work with you. Thank you for your initial comments. Now we will turn to Megan Shannon Volkovic.
Great, thank you. So housing cost burden really resonates for us at Enterprise Community Partners. A little bit about us and our organization. Our mission is to make home and community a place of pride, power, and belonging. And we do this through a number of pillars of work. One is we develop and deploy programs and support community organizations and nonprofits on the ground. Next slide, please. We also advocate through our policy platform. So we have a national team that sits at the Hill that is advocating for federal resources that support community investment, which includes affordable housing, economic development through new market tax credits, as well as rental subsidies to support families in current housing. And we do this through our capital platform. So we invest capital to build and preserve affordable housing. We are a syndicator of new market tax credits, low-income housing tax credits, and we have lending and financing as well. And lastly, I might add that we've started something new called the Enterprise Community Development Corporation. So for those of us in the world, and you may recognize this yourself, we are losing a tremendous number of units to the market once that were affordable and now have become overpriced. And we are trying to preserve larger multifamily properties across the country, including here in Georgia. And there was a portfolio of 13,000 units that were going to be lost to the market in Baltimore, Maryland. And we created an entity in order to acquire and preserve those properties. So today I just wanted to touch base with you on two aspects around community investment. One is the affordable housing demand, and the second is that how investing in community development and affordable housing relies on public and private partnerships. Next slide, please. So the need for affordable housing. As mentioned earlier, a big resource in creating affordable housing through community investment is through the low-income housing tax credit. And the housing credit, combined with other key resources, has had a tremendous impact in Georgia. As a matter of fact, since 1986, 170,000 affordable homes have been created, which has touched over 400,000 people. But we do know that the demand still remains great, with about 325,000 renter households in Georgia paying more than 30% of their income towards rent. We just heard Catherine speak about cost burden. We also know that many, if not most of these families are only a paycheck away from becoming homeless. So also in our analysis, we understand that in order to afford a modest one-bedroom apartment, a minimum wage worker in Georgia would have to work 91 hours a week. That's 2 full-time jobs and plus in order to afford an average one-bedroom right now if you were making a minimum wage. These are serious concerns. It's not just here in Georgia, but across the country. So the Action Campaign is a coalition of 2,400 members who have been organizing and advocating around the resources at the federal level, which will support us locally at the state level, to either one, build new affordable housing and or to preserve existing affordable housing. Next slide, please. One of the things, and so I'm a former affordable housing developer, and I have been doing this since 1990. And I can tell you that the dollars that were used back in 1990 to build affordable housing have either remained stagnant or have decreased. We know that the cost of building affordable housing and the demand are both greater. This slide here tells you that since 2010, funding for federal housing programs under the Department of Housing and Urban Development has been cut by $4.3 billion. Some exciting things are happening right now at the federal level, although the reconciliation that's happening actually is eliminating quite a bit around housing. So now is a very important time to keep a close eye, especially if this is a particular interest for you. The two here on the bars, the two that are actually higher, represent tenant vouchers, which help families to afford rent. And the second is what we call project-based vouchers, which as developers build projects, they can get a contract for their property in order to subsidize rents, keeping them very affordable for our low-income families. Next slide, please. So with resources a problem, we know that making the case on why creating affordable housing options for our families and our working families in Georgia is so important. It has a significant economic impact. So in the spring of 2020, Enterprise did an analysis of 100 affordable homes. And what we found is that for every 100 units of new construction, there were 191 jobs created. And under renovation, there was 130 jobs created, along with revenue generations. Just to give you a sense, under the action campaign, which really interesting about the site, and I'll put the link into the chat, you can press on the state of Georgia, and it actually gives you a profile of the impact on the investment in affordable housing, and impact around how many jobs created since they talk about how 275,000 jobs a year are created through the investment in affordable housing. They talk about how $10.7 billion of tax revenue is generated. And then also that since 1986, that $31 billion of wages and business income has been generated as a part of that investment. Next slide, please. So resources are needed in order for us to really make a difference. But we also recognize that with the declining resources at the federal or state level, that public and private partnerships are going to be very important. So one of the things we've done here locally through the House ATL coalition, and Sarah Kirsch, who was leading that effort with us for House ATL, one of the pillars of work was to invest in Atlanta, and we created something called the Funders Collective. So we brought public, private, and philanthropic partners together, and Georgia Power is a part of the House ATL work as well, to start to be intentional about looking and vetting at affordable housing opportunities and transactions with our nonprofits and our for-profits to think about how we work more efficiently together, identify gaps. So we came together around shared priority, around addressing affordable housing. We identified a pipeline of projects and developers who needed support and resources. And then as a group of public, private, and philanthropic partners, identifying how we enable the environment together to move those units of production and preservation forward. And then lastly, I just would show an example is how we work together as a public, private, and philanthropic partnership. This is a project, it's called Capital View. This is something we're seeing a significant issue across the state, where multifamily properties that are affordable by nature of the market are now being acquired by the market, being renovated, and then being put out on market rate units. So in this situation, we brought in our public partners such as Atlanta Housing, Invest Atlanta, the Georgia Department of Community Affairs, who's our state housing finance agency in the Beltline, the developer, lender, and philanthropy into one conversation, and we were able to, in a very short period, acquire the site. It has since been acquired, renovated, a new building with a community space and offices have been built, and it is up and operating and beautiful. And it actually sits right outside the West Side Beltline Trail, literally a lot of this property. So that's some of the work that we do, and that is so important in order to preserve affordability, and also as an anti-displacement measure in communities that are emerging through investments across Atlanta. And with that, I'll end and turn it over.
Thanks, Megan. You touched on so many important points and shared a lot of great data. The trend, the federal funding trend downward is something I think is new information for our employees. Connecting the dots on affordable housing and job creation, fueling the economy. Now that makes sense, but seeing the data, it really, I think it's been eye-opening for employees to see that. The work of House ATL, and that's such a great example of collaboration. That's the buzzword that everyone has said so far. It's being intentional. It's collaborating around these efforts and these challenges. It's really the only way to move forward. Solving for the capital stack. I mean, that is critical, and that's where your organization have played a tremendous role, and we've partnered, the company's partnered with you for many years as well in the housing space. So thank you for sharing your initial thoughts. Last but not at all least, Sarah Kirsch.
I can formally say good afternoon. It's great to be with friends and colleagues. I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about ULI, how the work shows up here locally, and then some examples of how some of us on the panel have worked together, as well as how Georgia Power's been a great partner in supporting this work. So as I mentioned, we are headquartered in Washington. We are an independent and nonpartisan organization singularly focused on impact. In the sort of environment that we're in, I take great pride on being an independent and nonpartisan organization that seeks to bring people together to problem solve. We were founded in 1936 to connect industry leaders, to inspire best practices for equitable and sustainable land use, and to lead in anticipating and addressing challenges facing the urban landscape. So those are our marching orders: to connect, to inspire, and to lead. So the last of the statement is addressing challenges facing the urban landscape. It will probably not surprise you, having heard from the 3 previous speakers, that one of the greatest challenges facing the urban landscape is housing affordability. We do, one of my favorite publications each year is Emerging Trends in Real Estate. And about this time last year, Emerging Trends in Real Estate 2021 was published. And trend number 9 out of 10 was affordability housing crisis likely to explode without intervention. Years of underfunding and lack of attention have created a housing availability and affordability crisis throughout the United States. Though particularly acute in major gateway markets, the problem exists in most markets. I think that is what's new across Georgia in particular, is that when we would go do work in Savannah 5 years ago, folks would say, oh, we don't have an affordability challenge here. And, fast forward 24 months, and it was clear that as the quote referenced, it's not just affordability, it is availability. It is truly also just about housing production. ULI has content centers, we call them. We have a Terwilliger Center for Housing. We have a Curtis Center for Infrastructure. We have a Greenprint Center that's focused on getting a path to net zero by 2050. And they do all sorts of great research. And our goal is to try and leverage that research, connect it with our local members, and empower them to make a difference at the local level. Again, next slide. So one of those critical issues, as I mentioned, being housing affordability. And probably 6 years ago, we were primarily focused on advancing walkable urban places and expanding transit access for a more sustainable region. Those were the key priorities that we thought were going to move the needle the most in in achieving the mission of a better region, a better city. And pretty shortly into that work, we realized that if we weren't leading with housing affordability, when we were talking about a more walkable, a more transit-oriented, a more connected Atlanta region, then we were talking about building places for few and not for many, and it was going to be about leaving lots of people behind. A group that Mike's a part of said, well, what can we do? What can we uniquely do? This is our Livable Communities Council. And the group said, I think we can set forth a framework for how our region can move forward. We defined the need and demand. We procured research, and a working group of about 15 people put together kind of a 10,000-foot level strategy for both the region and the city. And what's been so exciting about how that work has moved forward over the last 5 or so years are these spinoff initiatives. You've heard about House ATL. That was a coalition that was birthed really 4 years ago when housing affordability was the #1 issue in the mayoral and city council elections. Megan's been a tremendous leader on that, on the Funders Collective, and it's really been advancing these 23 key recommendations that became part of the Mayor's One Atlanta Housing Action Plan. We spun off a new fund. We were sitting in a room and said, man, well, could some of these people use their resources to make a difference? And the Atlanta Affordable Housing Fund was launched as a social impact fund. I think they are closing Fund 1 in December, which hopefully will be about $20 million that's investing in an impact way, so modest returns for affordable housing. And then what Mike spoke to, which is the Metro Atlanta Housing Strategy. We had sort of this, 10,000-foot level strategy, and ARC looked at it and said, oh, we can run with this. They took it, they've made it deeper, wider, much richer. And for any of you that are in the Atlanta region, I would encourage you to check it out if you're trying to understand what the housing needs are in your community and what specific solutions may resonate in your community. Metro Atlanta Housing Strategy is just a tremendous resource. Next slide. So one of the ways that we go about trying to make a difference at a very, very local level is through our technical assistance panels. So some of our housing affordability work shows up in technical assistance panels, but when we talk about community investment, this is one of the ways that we try and really bring our members' expertise to nonprofit and municipal and public sector land use challenges. We've conducted over 100 TAPs, as we call them, since 1997, and we'll bring together even some of these fellow panelists to help answer critical issues. The one referenced here was looking at Fulton County Executive Airport and how you really invest in that in a way to make it a stronger job center for that part of our region. You can see long list of other public and nonprofit types of clients that we work with and really try and help tackle land use challenges that otherwise they may not have the time or the resources to help unlock. Next slide. Another one I just want to highlight when we talk about community investment is a partnership we have with the Trust for Public Land and Park Pride. Georgia Conservancy's also done a lot of work in this area, is how we think about using resources we already have. And this is the Community Schoolyards Initiative. Georgia Power's been a great partner on this in terms of data and also helping us navigate this work. But the idea being that everyone in the U.S. should live within a 10-minute walk of green space or park. It's part of our physical, mental health. I think we can all appreciate that in these times more than ever. And Atlanta is one of the most underparked cities in the U.S., but we have a lot of private green space, some in folks' backyards and some in things like public schoolyards. So this is a pilot with Atlanta Public Schools to take 10 community schoolyards, and Delta, Georgia Power, other partners have helped invest in redeveloping, if you will, those schoolyards to get the resources and literal play equipment or athletic equipment that folks need. And then we've worked on how do we make sure that that community schoolyard is actually accessible in terms of infrastructure? Do you have a safe and comfortable walk? Are there sidewalks? Are there lights? Are there stop signs? Are there trails that can be unlocked so that people can have access to get to the school, to walk that track if they want to throw the ball? And hopefully this is a model that can be emulated in school systems across the state, and is really just sort of a great multi-solve for a lot of things we talk about with community investment. And next slide. And then finally, I just want to raise a little nuanced issue, but when we talk about community investment, a learning for me and a learning for, I think, the Urban Land Institute over the last 4 or 5 years in particular, has been that too often when we're talking about investing in communities, folks feel like investment, development plans are being done to them and not with them. And it creates, as I think Catherine said, we all hate change, right? Like it creates anxiety, probably creates more anxiety than ever before. But too often in underinvested neighborhoods, you just don't have folks who've been involved in negotiations, involved in trying to advocate for what their community really needs. And so we've taken a program we've done in high schools and universities for 25 years called Urban Plan. And we've expanded it for community leaders. So we've done this with NPUs in Atlanta. We've done it in City of East Point. We've done it in some new cities as they've formed, and are making some new decisions to make sure that residents understand the trade-offs that are involved in particularly real estate development. They have to make decisions about homelessness, about historic preservation, about including affordable housing, about site design, and all of this. And this is my favorite line that I've gotten from these last couple of years as a local resident who said, "My only problem with urban plan is that it came 20 years too late. I wish I had done this years ago before I ever sat down with the developer. My first question would have been, what is your vision? And the whole project would have gone a different direction." But just trying to empower folks with what questions to ask, what negotiations are more likely or less likely, so they can have a more empowered seat at the table. And I think with that, that concludes some examples of the work we're doing, and hopefully gives you some ideas of how ULI can be a partner. I think of ULI as a platform for how folks can make a difference on critical issues. And so there are lots of Georgia Power members, and Georgia Power is a terrific partner on a number of our efforts. So please think of it as that platform for you.
Thanks, Sarah. So much great information about how the housing that's available. It's not just the price point, but it's the inventory, right? It's the demand is far outpacing the supply and the production. So that's a huge challenge. House ATL, that work is tremendous. Georgia Power's proud to be a part of it. All of the spinoff initiatives, it goes back to what we're saying, collaboration being key. And it shows, I think House ATL and you all's leadership of it really helped to fuel that groundswell for folks to see it's not their problem, it's everyone's problem. It's all of us solving for this, because it's such a key piece of our growth and the sustainability of that growth. 10-minute walk, that schoolyards initiative, Sarah, I love that. Because both as a Georgia Power employee and a Park Pride board member, I'm doubly pleased and excited about our collaboration on that. And the quote at the end on Urban Plan is really a great full circle moment, tying it to our initial thoughts that we heard from Mike and really from all of you on intentional, thoughtful development. And that's really what we need to see as we move forward. So lots of great information. We'll move into the questions now, and then we'll see what questions we have from the audience, but we'll start with the questions I have for you. And Megan, the first one's for you. The affordable housing demand is outpacing supply. What is happening at the federal level that could potentially support more supply, the state and local efforts in Georgia?
Sure. Thanks for asking. So right now, under the Building Back Better legislation that's in front of our federal colleagues is had a significant amount of funding identified for housing. The discussion from taking it from over 3 trillion down to 2 trillion actually takes quite a bit of the affordable housing component out of it. But the good news is that Senate has actually just introduced 2022 appropriations identifying some increases in much of the resources that I showed on the graph that had gone down to bring them back up. So that is the good news. That was just introduced, I believe, on Friday. So we'll see how that happens. That's CDBG dollars and home dollars and all of those alphabet soup kind of call outs that you hear on resources for affordable housing. The one thing I do want to tell you is there's something that's on the table called the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. And that does a number of things right now. It expands the housing credit to address the severe shortage of affordable housing, which means the ask is, we have a certain amount of low-income housing tax credits that come down to each state. We need to increase that by 50%. If in fact that gets through, it can produce another 152,000 units of affordable housing annually in Georgia, right? So there's over the next 10 years, not annually, but over the next 10 years, which is significant, right? So that's an example of what's happening right now at the federal level around resources.
Great, thank you. That is encouraging indeed. Sarah, the next question is for you. From your work at ULI and through House ATL, how does housing affordability relate to the 4 social justice pillars more broadly?
Thanks, Christy. I think ULI is largely sticks and bricks people, right? They're the people who are building it, designing it, financing it, and are about the built environment. And I think what's been so important to understand is that housing isn't just the sticks and bricks, right? It's about what it does for people. And as I've worked with almost everyone on this panel, it's been so important for us to think about that housing is truly foundational. And I don't mean that as a pun, but it's a nice one. It is truly foundational to all of those things that you've talked about. So, we have models locally like Star C that have demonstrated that stable housing is so inextricably linked to educational outcomes that when a kid moves once in a year, you watch their test scores, not that test scores are the end all be all, but you watch their test scores drop. They move twice in a year because their parents have been displaced. Those test scores drop dramatically. And the reality is that happens to folks who don't have as many options, right? So it is entirely about social justice. You could say the same, and I think we've seen it during the pandemic in particular related to the criminal justice system as families are in unstable housing and kids are not having as many options of places to be. It's contributed to criminal justice issues. And certainly when we think about environmental justice, there is, a link between neighborhoods and communities that haven't seen as much investment and issues related to environmental justice. That's Catherine's area of expertise, not mine. But when we think about safe, stable housing, it truly pays dividends, if you will, to educational, health, economic mobility, all those other outcomes. And it's sort of, in my mind, putting good money to go further, if you will.
Thanks, Sarah. If we had more time, I'd talk about Star C and that incredible work Margaret Stagmeyer is doing. I mean, that's tremendous. Mike, the next question's for you. Why must we take a systems approach to understand change and to foster equitable outcomes?
Let me unmute myself. I'm going to say I wrote that question and kind of challenged myself. It sounds confusing now that you're reading it back to me. But it does get at this core idea. If we're really going to work on equity and we're really going to care about the individual in the best way possible, we've got to invert the burden. And that's a phrase I hope everybody remembers after you leave. We've got to really start to take responsibility for an individual's future at the systems level. If we're going to really drive equity in a meaningful way and address that first slide that I put up very specifically to demonstrate how people really didn't understand how the system was working. And understanding the system is a lifetime's work. And Sarah mentioned one of the those issues, just understanding household stability and what it means is something I've been thinking a lot about. And through a lot of our health work in particular, this idea of understanding upstream, midstream, and downstream impacts, that when you're thinking about equity and racism at the individual level, you're often at the downstream point in this framework of understanding. And it's in many cases the wrong time to be trying to address these issues, that we need to get upstream. And if we're upstream, we're really working at the systems level. We are talking about housing affordability, but not just housing affordability in isolation. We're talking about health, educational resources, right? And of course, access to job and economic opportunities. And that's why I wrote the question the way I did. But the critical thing is to invert the burden, to think in a systems fashion. And finally, if you're doing that, you're going to get very quickly to the place like, I need to go talk to other people. If you are doing work in isolation, you are probably not maximizing the potential of your ability to succeed with whatever you think you're going to be doing to help our community or even down at the individual level.
Thanks, Mike. I thought it was a great question. That's why it made the cut. Catherine, the next question is for you. What are potential social justice impacts of not planning for community change?
Thank you. I've been so appreciative of these comments these past few minutes. I mean, at the end of it all, we're all humans. We're all citizens and stakeholders in the community where we live, and we're all Georgians, right? And so these are very real human impacts, besides just professional explorations and opportunities of us, right, to try and tackle these things. These are very real people and real consequences. So I've been excited with some of the thoughts that our panelists have shared. So, what could not planning do? Well, it's gotten us some of the situations that we already have, and that's not to, kind of wag a finger at any of our communities, because these are all places that we love and where we live and where we work and places that we travel through. But it is not a foregone conclusion that we must, at the community level, continue to see, the change and development and growth that we've always seen. I think it's really important for your colleagues, our Georgia Power employees, to pause and really look at their community as they drive around, and then act through simple ways of conversation and asking questions to maybe, collaborating and looking for that opportunity to dig in with partners at the local level and say, how is our community positioned to adjust to change? And a lot of that, again, is growth and more population. But I want to be mindful that we're a big state with a lot of different dynamics going on, and we're going to see communities that are and continue to shrink, but that doesn't mean that you don't plan for that change as well. And so, some of the social justice implications are at a very basic level, and I think Sarah touched on this quite a bit, is to continue to see not the right housing options available, the right price point in the right location at the right volume, and we see these household impacts. And she very eloquently put it through the lens of a child and, derailing a child's future because of that. So that is one way of just not planning for housing choice, housing attainability. Beyond that, at a planning level, and I am a planner, is continuing to present options for employment, options for housing, and even options for healthcare, parks, and so forth that are too far from our neighborhoods and our population centers. Again, when we put things near things, it's not the total solution. There are more details than that, but it absolutely fundamentally gets at a greater opportunity for access and use. And then finally, details do matter. It seems an aesthetic nicety, perhaps, to plant a tree or to save a tree or to have a green space in a community, but we know that it not only has potential climate impacts and environmental improvements, but it improves our public health through cleaner air in the hot South, through shade and just simple enjoyment of many months of our year. And those details of how a community looks with natural features and how it's connected from sidewalks and then things being near things goes a long way towards beginning to turn the tide on social injustice. And I'm not trying to oversimplify things. I'm actually trying to make it more attainable to begin to hammer away at that systemic impact. It begins, that Mike talked about, it begins with some very critical conversations and joining in the conversations and asking at your community level for some improvements or just some change in the way it's traditionally been done.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate your comments. And it's something we talk about in community and economic development here at Georgia Power a lot is you have to plan. You know, no matter what comes your way, you have to be ready. You have to take those opportunities to be strategic and think about what you want to see and be prepared for what comes your way. So thank you for your comments. All right, we're going to go to Monique, who has some questions from the audience. Monique.
Thanks so much, Christy. One of our viewers asked, great input on affordable housing acquisition, but what initiatives are being put in place for preservation? Generational residents seem to be more at risk of displacement.
Who wants to take that one?
It's Megan. I'll kick us off. You know, preservation is a really critical solution to affordability and maintaining housing security. I can tell you that in thinking about public-private partnership, Georgia Power actually is a partner in an initiative around Rural Southeast Preservation Academy to help support identifying where there are preservation needs in rural parts of Georgia and working with communities on the ground in order to preserve those properties, both making sure they remain affordable as well as in quality standard. So that's one example. The state of Georgia, the Department of Community Affairs, also puts out an annual, what we call a qualified allocation plan, and they are prioritizing preservation. So on the actual preserving of the asset itself, there are a number of initiatives that are underway. And also Sarah Kirsch talked about the Atlanta Affordable Housing Fund, and multiple other funds are starting to be created that support acquisition of sites to ensure preservation across the state.
I'd just add, you know, the fact that this individual asked the question probably means they don't need this answer, but for the benefit of the full audience, you know, preservation is arguably the single most pressing issue we need to be focusing on, because once that particular housing is gone, it is gone. And to replace it is very expensive. You will pay for it in subsidy and it may be density when you rebuild. And we know folks' anxiety about density in a lot of places. And so, you know, if you're in a community and you have housing that is affordable to the workforce, I would encourage you to protect it, invest in it, think about it as a treasure in your community, because it is really hard to replace it once it's gone. And we know that we need housing for the full suite of resources. On the homeowner side, you know, there have been some innovative models like Westside Future Fund that has capped increases in property taxes. There is an expansion of that model to Beltline neighborhoods in the city. It is one that I imagine we'll see more conversations about how you expand that model and or make it part of longer term policy solutions, so it's not just a philanthropic solution.
Great. Any other questions, Monique?
Yes, Christy. One more question around affordable housing to the panel. There continues to be large increases in housing prices via gentrification that forces out less affluent families. What is being done to level the playing field for affordable housing in more urban communities with current investment partners?
I can jump in. You know, I think this panel's heard me say this many times, there is no silver bullet, right? You need to be doing a lot of things to ensure that legacy residents in particular are not displaced. I think one is that we've named it, right? That sounds really silly, but I think if we were having this conversation 10 years ago and someone said legacy residents, we would kind of go, what do you mean by that? And I think everyone on this panel knows what we mean when we say legacy residents, people who've lived there and people who should be able to benefit from investments in that community. And too often it means that that folks aren't or can't. You know, there is this tension because you want people also to have the option to capitalize on that investment. And, you know, I have family friends who are in their 70s and have lived in a neighborhood that's gone sky high in prices, and they've discovered that's their retirement nest egg, right? So there are some benefits there, but the Westside Future Fund model, the Beltline model are two on the home ownership side. Housing production really matters too, just to have more housing produced in the community. And then, you know, through the work of House ATL, we've also spent a lot of time talking about that, you know, physical displacement is one thing, and there are tactical ways to make sure people are not physically displaced. And those are in the form of producing more housing, tax policy, a number of other preservation strategies, because those are inextricably linked, the preservation of the housing and making sure folks aren't displaced. But there's also a lot of work to do to make sure that there's not political displacement. You see new homeowners associations cropping up, and there gets to be a confusion over who gets to speak for the neighborhood, right? You'll see cultural displacement in terms of cultural assets not being preserved anymore. So, you know, that gets into a little bit more nuanced aspect of it. But I think those things really matter in terms of the identity of a community, and people are having more of that conversation as part of planning and as part of redevelopment strategies.
Such a great answer, Sarah. It's so true. You think many years ago, if we'd heard legacy residents, displacement, anti-displacement, we all would have been scratching our heads. And I agree with you. There is power in naming that, and that then leads to having a conversation around it and solving for it. So thank you for that. So the last question for you. In our earlier social justice webinars, we made mention of our social justice efforts, creating hope for better jobs, for a better way of life and stronger communities. What are you seeing in the community investment space that gives you hope that we as a state are moving in the right direction? What's for any of you?
I'll offer, and this sounds, again, very simple, but I have witnessed it being very powerful. My hope and what I'm seeing at the community level is more individuals re-engaging or engaging for the first time in community conversations about priorities, and those priorities being broader as to what's important, and that's this broad topic of community investment, community development, and I'm loving it. And I think that the more the dialogue gets richer, and folks asking questions and bringing to the table, you know, something they've found or they've researched, and then saying, I want that too. You know, lovely places don't have to be places we drive through or we visit or we see pictures of. Our communities can be lovely places, and I mean that in the sense of options for all, natural amenities, parks for all, and housing choices for all. So quite simply, you know, beginning the conversation, having expectations of your companies, such as your employees, you know, wanting to have this discussion and partaking of this conversation in your whole series. That is so incredibly powerful, and that gives me tremendous hope. And I've seen that hope translate into improvements in a variety of communities across Georgia.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. And we are almost out of time. I do want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for your comments today. I know it's helped our employees to understand the challenges, the issues, the landscape, and the importance of this work and importance of the company's commitment to this work. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your partnership. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Monique, in case there are other questions. And also, I know you'll close with some reminders and announcements.
Yes, Christy. Actually, we did have a couple of more questions come in from the audience, but I would like to just share one of those and see if the panel or someone on the panel can answer that. It was previously stated that HUD funding has dropped significantly over the years. Can someone speak to the reason why funding decreased and any ways that individuals can influence some of the policy decisions to move funding in a positive direction?
I'll take that, at least kick it off. Obviously, politics play a big part of what's being prioritized at the federal level. That trickles down to the state and then down to our local municipalities. I would say, right now is an opportunity for you to engage in coalitions and campaigns. The action campaign is one that I mentioned. The other is, your local elected officials are representing all of us and our voices around what's important to us in our communities. And if affordable housing is important, and that they need to hear that. They need to understand that it's important to your community, it's important to the families, to everybody here, that we maintain housing affordability and housing security in the state of Georgia. So that would be one of the pieces I would advocate for, is speaking with your elected officials.
Thank you, Megan. One last question before we wrap up. When speaking of capitalism, how do communities forecast or find an equal balance between community investment and capital investment projects?
Just to respond in the most simplistic way in our work and thinking about the way we allocate transportation dollars, I think it's important to acknowledge we built a lot, and maintaining what we have has disproportionately taking up the pie of our available funds. Really about 66% of our core investments are just in maintaining the systems we have. And so the challenge in the performance evaluation of the way we think about long-range plans is that balance. We really know it's unbelievably expensive if you let that core infrastructure fall off. So we do typically put a high priority on maintenance, which means there's less money to expand those systems, and that's always a challenge because we're always going to ask for more money for that type of infrastructure. But I don't think that's a complete answer to the question. I don't know if Sarah, you want to speak to that as well.
I'll just add from kind of ULI's perspective, when we think about infrastructure, we think about transportation. We also think about parks and trails and that type of infrastructure investment as the major capital projects. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, who is going to benefit and how do we make sure those benefits flow to everyone? And I think that's the social justice imperative, right? Is that if we are capping an interstate with a park, for instance, I think there are 4 proposals in our region, how do we make sure that the people who are there now can benefit? And how do we make sure the benefits of that investment flow to as many people as possible, and particularly people who may have been negatively impacted in the past? And I think if we take that lens to all capital investments and make sure it's not just in the transaction, but the how it's done and who's engaged in the process, will go a long way in marching towards those pillars that Georgia Powers put forward.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Christy for moderating this amazing and very informative panel. Thanks to Mike, Catherine, Megan, and Sarah for providing our Georgia Power employees with such insightful information that they can take back to the communities in which they live and serve in. So thank you to all of our employees for attending our third webinar in a series of 6 social justice webinars on community investment. You will receive a brief survey of 5 questions that will take less than 2 minutes to complete. Your feedback is very important to us as it will be considered for future webinars. The next webinar will be held on November 10th, same time, same place, and the conversation will focus on criminal justice equity, featuring our very own Doug Jenkins, West Region Vice President, along with a panel of community leaders. You don't want to miss it. See you on November the 10th.